Welcome in, everyone. Today, we are taking a deep dive into something I think we can all relate to. Those cravings that make healthy choices, well, a little challenging.
A very relatable struggle indeed.
We ask you to share your thoughts on the poem Pumpkin Leaves by Nona Moysu and an episode from the podcast, Life Lessons Unplugged.
And it's such a fun pairing, don't you think? We have this playful poem and then a podcast that's all about, practical advice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Pumpkin Leaves, it really does feel like stepping right back into childhood, you know? Like,
Yeah.
imagine being that kid who wants, tacos and candy.
Basically anything but the veggies, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is Pumpkin's big dilemma.
And what's brilliant is how Moysu captures that child's voice so perfectly.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that line about an ice-cold flavored cone of snow.
Oh,
It's so vivid, it's not just about wanting something sweet, it's that whole sensory experience.
it's like you can practically taste that sugary syrup, feel the coldness.
It taps into that sense of nostalgia, wouldn't you say?
100%. And then there's the humor of it all, like Pumpkin pretending to eat the veggies and then dropping it purposely down below.
Oh, come on, we've all been there.
Totally. I mean, maybe not all of us, but,
But beneath that playful scene, there's a deeper point about, child development.
Oh, for sure.
Learning to make healthy choices, it's a process, right? It's not something that happens overnight.
It's so true.
And food, being such a basic need, often becomes this battleground for those early lessons in willpower.
That's such a good point. And what I love is that Pumpkin Leaves doesn't get all preachy about it,
Right, it just lets the scenario speak for itself.
Okay, but let's talk about that ending for a sec.
Mhm.
Pumpkin makes this big show of choosing to be good, but it all revolves around, hiding the sweets in a bow.
Yeah.
So is it really genuine change? Or is it more about, appearances?
That's the question, isn't it? And it makes you think about how complex behavior changes, especially for kids.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe Pumpkin is taking a small step towards making a better choice, even if it's driven by, I don't know, wanting to please their parents or maybe just avoid a conflict.
It makes you think about all the times parents have, hidden veggies to get their kids to eat them.
Exactly. There's a whole psychology to it.
So maybe we shouldn't be too hard on Pumpkin.
Yeah.
It could be that this little act of, this deception is actually a sign of progress, even if it's subtle.
And that's what makes Pumpkin Leaves so interesting to me. It doesn't give you easy answers, but it makes you think about, what's going on inside a child's mind as they try to balance their desires with what's expected of them.
Totally. Which reminds me, we have to talk about that Life Lessons Unplugged episode.
Oh, yeah.
The host, Ponytail, I think it was, they were talking about, that struggle of choosing an apple over chocolate,
It's so relatable.
Seriously.
Right.
Right. I think we've all been there.
It's like they read Pumpkin Leaves and said, hey, let's make this a real life thing,
Uh-huh. Totally. But on a serious note, though, I think it's so interesting how both of these, the poem and the podcast, they both kind of touch on this thing about, willpower.
Yeah, that internal battle between what we want and what we know is good for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they go about it in totally different ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Pumpkin Leaves, it's whimsical, right? It's lighthearted. It's told from a child's point of view.
Yeah, and the podcast, it's more like, I don't know, like I'm a friend giving advice.
Right. It's encouraging, but it's also grounded in reality,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
It's like, welcome to adulthood. Here's how we deal with cravings.
exactly. And I think that's where you see the strengths of each medium. The poem, with its simple language, it helps us connect with that raw, almost primal feeling of wanting something, especially as kids.
Totally. And then the podcast comes in with these, actual strategies.
Yeah, like tools to help us make better choices.
Which I think is super helpful.
Oh, definitely. Like when Ponytail was talking about making small changes over time, I
So
was like,
done.
yes, that's it. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress, right?
It's like that saying, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But for food.
Haha, exactly. And the thing that really struck me was, the emphasis on self-compassion.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, it's okay if you reach for the cookie jar sometimes.
Don't beat yourself up about
Well,
it.
It's about acknowledging the struggle and giving yourself a break.
I think that's so important.
Me too. Especially these days when everything is quick fixes and instant results.
It's hold on a second. Life's not like that.
No, it's not. It's about finding a balance that works for you.
Being okay with that.
Exactly. So yeah, I think both the poem and the podcast do a really great job of, conveying that message, each in their own way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome how something like cravings, which can be kind of, a silly topic.
Yeah, it seems kind of surface level.
Right. But it can actually spark such deep conversations.
And it makes you think about, the power of storytelling,
Totally. because we see ourselves in these stories.
Exactly, whether it's Pumpkin's desire to please or Ponytail's honesty about their own, struggles with food.
I think that's what makes it so powerful, you know, that relatability. It
Yeah.
really is amazing, right? Like
Yeah.
how a simple poem like Pumpkin Leaves and then, a podcast episode, how they can make us think so much about cravings.
It really speaks to the power of art, don't you think?
Totally. Taking something so ordinary and making it like really resonate with people.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, what was going on with Nona Moysu when they wrote this poem?
Right. Like what inspired it?
Well, speaking of Nona Moysu, you might find this interesting. We actually learned from a past deep dive that Nona Moysu is a pen name.
Oh, wow. Really? I had no idea.
Yeah. And apparently, the person behind the pen name, it's not exactly who you might expect.
Hmm. Okay. Tell me more.
It's rumored that they might have been a 911 operator at one point.
Whoa. Seriously. A
Yeah.
911 operator. Talk about a contrast.
Right. Like, from emergency calls to these playful poems about picky eaters.
It really makes you think about like the different sides people have.
Oh, for sure. And you know what? It makes me think about Pumpkin Leaves a little differently now.
How so?
Well, I mean, it seems so lighthearted, right? But maybe there's more depth to it than we realize.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Maybe all of that experience, dealing with those high-pressure situations, maybe it gave them a different perspective on resilience, on dealing with challenges.
That is fascinating. It's like there's this whole other story beneath the surface.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive, that's something I really want you to take away with you.
What's that?
It's so easy to take things at face value, but just like we learned about Nona Moysu, there can be so much more to discover if we just, scratch the surface a little.
I love that. It's a good reminder
Hmm.
to be curious, to look for those hidden depths, those connections we might not see at first glance.
Exactly. Because you never know what you might find.
That is so true. And on that note, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you enjoyed this insightful conversation and will join us next time for another fascinating discussion.